Okay, we're live. Hi, this is Kevin from Meditation Magazine, and I'm very happy to be introducing you today to Tara Brach. She is a very popular meditation teacher. She's the founder of the Insight Meditation community in Washington, D.C., as well as the author of multiple books, including Radical Compassion and Radical Acceptance. And she's also has a PhD in psychology and has come through some very interesting experiences in life in ashrams and then moving more into the Buddhist path. And I'm very happy to be talking to you today. Hi, Tara. How are you doing?
Hi, Eric. It's good to be with you too, and with all who are listening. Welcome, friends. So
Yes,
we'll begin with a short guided meditation. So
that
wherever
sounds
you
good.
are, make yourself comfortable. And that means you might be sitting in a way that's upright, but find a way of relaxing, being at ease. You might let your eyes close or your gaze be downcast. And let's start together, just coming together with the breath. It's so beautiful just to take a really long, deep breath. So count to 5 as you breathe in, or 4, but fill the chest and the lungs. And then the out breath is matched. 4 or 5 counts out, letting go, letting go. And then again, breathing in, long, deep in breath, filling the chest and the lungs. And with the out breath, slow out breath, so you can actually feel the release of the air through the nostrils, letting go, letting go. And one more time, inhaling deeply. And a slow out breath, smooth, even release, letting go, letting go. And then as the breath resumes in its natural rhythm, simply observing it, feeling it, and noticing that there's a bit more of a sense of being collected and present just after even a few breaths. And you might gently scan through your body and sense if there's any part of you that wants to let go a little bit more right now, where there's some tension or tightness. It can be really helpful to feel the shoulders from the inside out. And you might even imagine a dissolving of ice to water, and then water to gas, letting go. Let the hands rest in a very easy, effortless way, and you might soften the hands, and then soften them again. And see if you can notice from the inside out the tingling or vibrating there. Let the chest be open, relaxing the abdominal area, letting this next breath be received in a softening belly. This breath, and now this one, and again. You're feeling the breath, the aliveness deep in the torso. And if you widen the attention to feel this whole body as a field of sensation. Feeling the breath as a stream in that field. And perhaps listening and sensing included in that field the sounds that are around you. So you're listening to and feeling the whole moment. relaxed, awake, at home in presence. And as a way of closing this short meditation, you might listen to your heart. Just sense the state of your heart right now. Whatever mood or emotion is here. And sense in this moment whatever you want to offer yourself in terms of a wish, a blessing, some kindness offered inwardly. Perhaps a simple message or reminder of what matters. And then sensing your heart space as including all of us, all beings. Sensing your wish for all beings, your prayer for all beings. And just take a few full breaths, open your eyes if they're closed, and namaste. Blessings. Thank you.
Yeah. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. That was beautiful. May all beings be and free. Yeah. There's like that beautiful mantra. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy, rejoicing as one. That's my wish for all beings, and thank you for putting me in that state and for putting us, all the people watching this, and into that beautiful state of presence. I was coming into this live stream in a sort of anxiety. I tend to get anxiety when I do these things. Aside from meeting a new person, especially someone esteemed like Tara Brach or other people that we've interviewed recently, there's that social anxiety that comes up, but then there's also this technical anxiety of like, oh, is the live stream working? And at the beginning of the meditation, I'm like checking on my phone, is like, is it working? And yeah, it seems like it's working. I can see there's a couple of people watching right now, so that's a good thing. If you're watching, please make comments. Send questions for Tara. This way, we know that the live stream is working, and we're happy. And if you send questions, we're very happy to try to answer them for you. So that meditation was a very sort of Buddhist, mindful kind of meditation, and I actually, that's where I started in my spiritual journey. I guess I started with uh, like Eckhart Tolle and reading The Power of Now, which is a very mindful kind of book, being in touch with everything. And then I ended up in a monastery in Thailand, in a Buddhist monastery called Wat Suan Mok, which I think I might have actually gotten from a list from Jack Cornfield. I'm not sure, who I know you work with. And that was a very powerful thing for me, a very powerful path. And I want to get into your personal story in a few minutes, but that meditation just brought it up for me, this difference between the sort of Buddhist style, mindfulness style meditations that I sort of started out with as I was starting in the Buddhist path. And then after I discovered Wim Hof, this guy over here, and started getting into pranayama a little bit, I started and that pranayama that comes from the sort of yogic more, India and path, um, I started finding that that was doing different things for me. And now for me, I use both. I use like the Buddhist style meditation and the mindfulness meditation, like most of the time, trying to be mindful of what I'm doing in daily life. And I try to do some sitting every day of just being mindful of my body and sensations. But I've also recently been really into the pranayama and how it can change your experience and your emotions very quickly. And I wanted to talk to you about this because I know that you came from, you started after college, you were in an ashram, and then you ended up sort of moving more toward the Buddhist and mindful kind of path. What are your feelings about the differences between these types of meditations, and why have you sort of moved toward the Buddhist and mindful side?
Well, it's a wonderful question, Eric, and I love your
Oh,
progression.
by the way, I just want to point out my name is Kevin. I think you called me Eric before, also.
Oh, I had written down an Eric, and
That's
of
okay.
course you're Kevin. I'm
Yeah,
now, yeah,
it's okay. I just wanted to mention that before it got too far into the interview,
before
and
there
then
were too many Erics flying
yeah,
around.
exactly.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
that. Yeah. And I hope that if you had social anxiety, just to say, to do that, because we're all so aware of it matters to be known for our name. So now I'm feeling in myself, oh my gosh,
Don't worry about
I
it.
hope you don't feel unseen by me.
It happens. On my interview with Deepak Chopra, I remember he was trying to remember my name, and he was like looking on the screen, and it was like a little bit embarrassing, but but
Oh,
it's part
that's
of
great.
it's part of
That's
life.
great.
I actually kind of I like the practice of embarrassment in a certain way. Like it's kind of fun. I like to play with it. It's kind of like a funny feeling. You know what I mean? And
Well, I feel the same way, and what I really love, and I love the way you started in just naming it out loud, because I feel if we could all be with each other and just name what's real when it's coming up, like if I can say, "Oh my gosh, that feels really," I feel really dumb for that one, and it's like all of a sudden the identification around it starts dissolving and we get to rest more in connectedness. It's by not naming it that we get in trouble. So I mean, I feel closer to you, Kevin, now because of both of us being real in that way.
yeah,
So
yeah, I like that too. Thank you. There's like a book called Radical Honesty out there. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it kind of
yeah, yeah.
reminds me of the naming of your books. That one, it's all about just kind of speaking what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And to me, if you don't do it, like you said, the things that are unsaid are just so much more damaging and harmful inside, and like there's so much, they make everything tight once they, there's a this beautiful quote from the Zen master. His name was Shrek. He said, better out than in. That's what I always say. So
That's cute. That's got some humor to it too.
yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, that's how I feel about it. But yeah, I want to hear your thoughts about the sort of Buddhist mindful kind of meditations versus the that pranayama style, and why you gravitated toward the Buddhist styles.
Sure. Well, I spent a good 10 years in an ashram, so I did a lot of pranayama and with that, a more concentrative kind of meditation where we were focused on a mantra or the breath. And it did wonderful things. As you described, it directly shifts your biochemistry, it shifts your mood, and it allows you, the concentrative practices allow my mind to get quite still, quite focused. What I was missing, though, was a way to just be open to reality in the moment. And what happens is with concentrative practices, if you imagine that there's a pond with a lot of weeds, concentration pulls over the weeds as if you're putting a fence in there to kind of pull it over. And so you can see clearly to the bottom of the pond. But then as soon as you stop making the effort to push the weeds aside, they're there again. And what mindfulness does is it's got a kind of profound way of cutting through in the moment so that you can really see just what's here and be at peace with it as it is. So rather than trying to control the weather, it's really becoming a big enough sky so that the weather can move through us. And I'm talking emotional weather now. So mindfulness was critical for really coming to peace with myself. I struggled with what I call the trance of unworthiness, and which I know now is pervasive. In fact, I wrote Radical Acceptance because so many people are caught in a feeling like something's wrong with me, I'm failing. And what I found was concentration could help me feel better in, just I'd get into a more, relaxed, peaceful place. But it was mindfulness that helped me let go of the limiting beliefs and open to really the goodness, the moment to moment awareness and love that's really our essence. So mindfulness was more profoundly healing for me. I still do both. I do pranayama at times, I use concentrative practice at times, and I use mindfulness. So I actually weave them together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I actually I've listened to a bunch of your meditations. It's usually like more in the Buddhist style, but yeah, for me, I like to mix them together as well, and I like to kind of teach all of them together. I wanted to get a little bit more into your experience coming up through like how you got to this point in your life. So at this point, you've been through so much. You're a PhD psychologist. You're a meditation teacher that has like founded major like the Insight meditation community in Washington D.C. And you've written books. And a lot of people may look up to you as like this sort of like teacher person that is just like super put together and zen and everything. But for me, I always find that the story of how people got there is very interesting because it usually starts with some suffering and some difficulties and some personal issues. So how did you get started in the path of meditation? Like, were you meditating as a child? Did you get into it somewhere along the way? Like, what was that like?
Sure, these are really wonderful questions. Um, as a child, I wasn't meditating. My first spiritual glimmers really were in nature and still are. I mean, nature is really my religion in some ways. Uh, but in terms of formal practice, when I was in college, I was a social activist. I was on my way to law school. I was planning to go to law school. Um, on the weekends, I'd be at, rallies and meetings and so on. And then I started on Tuesday nights to take yoga to kind of work on health and to really help me, where I mentioned the trance of unworthiness, to really help me kind of connect with myself. So I started noticing, Kevin, that I would be um, on the weekends we'd be doing this political stuff, and there was a lot of anger energy, a lot of making others into the enemy and pumping fists, and it just had that kind of a stridency. Then I'd land up on Tuesdays at meditation and yoga class, and I'd come out feeling, so good. I remember one spring night, and the fruit trees were, wafting their scents, and I stood still under a tree. This was after class, and realized my body and my mind were in the same place at the same time. And I felt so at home, and I realized this is the consciousness we need to be changing our world. I mean, if we're talking about creating a world with more peace and love and justice, it's not going to come out of anger and hatred. It's not going to come because we turn others into the enemy. So I decided that I wanted to really do a deep dive into, what are the practices and teachings that really free our hearts and that really allow us to be all that we can be in terms of being loving and awake in the world. So I moved into an ashram and I stayed there for a decade and really put a lot of very disciplined practice, as I've described it, with concentration and pranayama and so on. We got up at, you know, 3:30 in the morning every morning, and it was intensive. And as I mentioned to you, um, it helped it helped me in many ways, but it did not really cut through that sense of something's wrong with me. There was still a sense I was trying to achieve something or get somewhere or purify something, you know. And I remember early on, I had this idea it would take me about 8 years to be enlightened. You know, I don't know where I got that from. So I was working really hard, and I'd go to different teachers and I'd say, well, what else can I do? And they'd look at me and they'd quickly sum it up and say, just relax. And I'd then think, okay, I'm going to just relax now. You know, it would become another project. So clearly I was striving. And it wasn't until after I left the ashram that, and when I started practicing in the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness, that I saw that striving and I started learning how to really trust more and trust who I was. And actually that's the title of my most recent book is Trusting the Gold, because what I've seen over the decades is that the real sign of freedom and awakening and the real gift is that we trust who we are, that we trust that for all the conditioning to be aggressive or addictive or defensive or whatever, that our essence really is that awareness, is that love. So my path has been an ever awakening of that. And I spent, you know, the last few decades in the Buddhist tradition, were teaching and writing about this. And just to say, I have become much more activist again in terms of the causes that are dear to my heart. But it's not so much from a place of um, anger and hatred as just because I care. And so I feel like the inner path that we're talking about, Kevin, of how we wake up our hearts and minds, that it cannot be separated from how we live in this world and caring. If we believe everything's connected, then we need to be able to sense that the suffering in this world is part of our suffering and that we need to be part of the healing. So I am activist out there too now.
Yeah, nice. I actually wanted to ask about the activism. But first, actually, I wanted to touch on a topic that you brought up about at the ashram, you know, you had felt like you were striving for something. And I understand that, you know, I kind of come with my own similar kind of feeling of like, oh, I have to try to be, you know, something or be more Zen or things like that. You know, it's kind of a funny impulse that a lot of people come into spirituality with, which is like, I need to improve myself. And there's like self improvement is seen as a good thing in the West, and then in, you know, the meditation, there's this sort of paradox where you're trying to improve yourself in a certain way by letting go, but also like you're trying to improve yourself by stopping to try to improve yourself. You know what I mean? It's and to accept who you are without having to try to get somewhere. You know what I mean? And I find that paradox to be very interesting. That in the ashram they told you just relax. It does seem like the people that were there, they saw that you were doing this striving thing, and that they were trying to guide you to not do that, but that you ended up finding that relaxation, finding that self-acceptance through the mindfulness path. So do you think that the path that you had been on before with the at the ashram was inherently not going to get you there, or do you think that maybe it was also leading in that direction of self-acceptance, but you just didn't get there on that path, and that it ended up being the mindfulness that got you there?
Good question. Yeah. Well, those who told me to just relax actually weren't in the ashram. I would meet with different spiritual teachers. The culture of the ashram community was very much oriented around, if you imagine a ladder of spirituality, it was like climbing the ladder to transcend impurities. Whereas what I learned in the Buddhist practice was much more of a turning around to just embrace this messy world in all its imperfection. And
Mm.
so there was really a difference. There was a cultural feel that was quite different. But I think striving and trying to self improve actually gets into the shadow side of every path. I don't think it's, well,
Mm.
the Buddhists are more into acceptance and the Hindus are more into striving. I think that it's personality driven. It's our society. We're in a society that thinks we always have to expand the economy and we always have to do more and do bigger and make more money. And it's a very much of a cultural bent to be more. And it's a very rare moment for any of us that we can say enough, that this moment's enough, that who I am's enough, you're enough. It's very much we're very driven. So I think it's a real mix. But what I can say is that concentrate the concentrative practices in pranayama are designed to change your state. And mindfulness is designed to become aware of what's here. And that fundamental difference makes is the world for many of us who truly want to learn to let be. So that felt significant to me.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction about pranayama being about changing your state versus the acceptance of mindfulness, of the being, the equanimity of just being with whatever is. That is definitely a fundamental difference. I do think that there's the pranay like not pranayama itself, the yogic path in general is really does also have that as sort of its deepest form, and its highest way of being, if you could put it that way, is just being with the universe. Yoga is about union with the universe, and when you're one with the universe, there's nothing to strive for, really. But I know that what you said about it being in the shadow side of all paths, I think it's true. It really doesn't matter what you're doing. You can always have that like spiritual striving and spiritual ego and spiritual one-upmanship and all that kind of stuff can be in any of the paths. What I actually, when you talk about the ashram, I wonder where that was. You don't have to say what ashram it was, but was it like a Western ashram? Was it in India? Like, where was that?
Oh, yeah, it was a Western ashram, and I lived in a few different parts of the country as part of a national kind of network of ashrams.
Yeah, so when you had talked about it, I had such a different experience at the ashram that I went to. It was Amma's ashram in Amritapuri in southern India, and it was the most one of the most profound experiences that I had in my life. Just having my heart open, like as I went through the gates, and I had been in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand, and there I had a very powerful kind of awakening that's more similar to what you're talking about, where I spent 7 days. I was doing this 10-day meditation retreat, silent meditation, and the first 7 days I had been struggling against these thoughts that I had in my head, all this anxiety that I came with, all kinds of things that I had been thinking about from before. And I kept feeling like, why am I so anxious? Like 6 or 7 days into a meditation retreat. Shouldn't I be feeling zen right now? Shouldn't I be feeling happy? And like, why am I even here if I'm just going to be suffering with all this anxiety? And on the seventh day, I just let go. I just gave up. That's really the right word. Is not letting go. Letting go is like almost like something that you like strive for. Like giving up is like something like, it's like, oh, I can't even do this anymore. I'm not going to struggle against these these thoughts. Like they're just here. I'm just like, whatever. It's like I can't even fight anymore. I was too exhausted. And that was when the powerful like experience came. That's when the powerful change happened, where it was suddenly, when I gave up, I was no longer struggling, and I was just suddenly there. And I was like filled with all this bliss and this like ecstasy of equanimity, if you could call it that. And it was just this like floating on clouds for the next 3 days. And that was one of the most powerful experiences I ever had in my life. But then when I was in the ashram in India, it was a very different kind of experience. It was like a heart opening experience where as soon as I passed through the gates, I just felt like this overwhelming sense of love that was coming from Amma, the woman who runs that ashram. Well, she doesn't really run it; she just is the center of it. And I wonder maybe if part of that is because it's a woman that was like the center of the ashram rather than the I listened to your Tim Ferriss podcast, and I know that you were talking about the ashram that you were at, having a man being at the center of it, and being a very sort of patriarchal hierarchy kind of thing. What do you like? Our next issue is called "Powerful Women in Meditation," and I think that there's something to that. I think that there's something to the female energy, like being sort of more compassionate in a certain way. And of course, men could have that too. But what do you think about? Do you think that I don't know, that like a female run ashram or monastery, or bringing more female energy into those places can bring more of that kind of soft compassion energy? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it feels like probably the most crucial direction we can go as a world, that the feminine archetype is cultivated, is given its place. So it's not as much a woman or a man, as you say, because there are women that have their hearts shut down, and men who can be utterly compassionate. But the reason I've emphasized in my own practice and teaching the centrality of compassion, which means that we know how to be tender and be in tender relationship with our inner life and with each other, is because it's the single most powerful element I've seen for all of us on the healing path. And we all have wounded hearts. I don't know anyone that hasn't felt, you know, in some way lonely, or betrayed by others, or rejected or hurt, or feeling, as I've been mentioning, something's wrong with me, I don't deserve. So if we want to be free, we have to be able to address that layer of our being. And the only healing for that layer is compassion. I call it sometimes spiritual reparenting, because we need to have the mindfulness that sees what's going on, that sees, okay, I'm caught in that, the voice of the harsh critic has completely oppressed me. We have to see that, and then we need to be able to regard it with compassion. Because if you think, well, what does a child most need? A child that's hurting, they need the parent to be able to that it's happening, and to be able to comfort. And so I feel like a really important part of the whole meditative process is that we bring that seeing and loving to our inner life. I often put my hand on my heart, and I'll send a message to myself. I'll even say, "It's okay, sweetheart," or "I'm here, I'm not leaving." And I found for people that can begin to do that, then they are actually more profoundly open to others and able to accompany and attune when another person is really having a hard time, and actually offer the kind of presence that really makes a difference. So I love the question you're asking, Kevin, because that is the feminine archetype. That's what Amma is, a space of tender heart, you know, that because her vibration and uh, her realization so strong, it's like anybody around her can feel that, and it helps to calm the armoring that we all habitually, you know, have around our hearts. So this is something for spiritual teachers that that is an expression that can be healing and transmission, and for each of us, that we know that this path of self-compassion and then opening the circles of compassion to include everyone with no being exempt. You know, it's that even those that we sense are causing a lot of harm on the planet, that we do whatever we can to stop that harm, but that our heart doesn't push away anyone, because our heart's not free if it's pushing away. And the most deep pain is that we push our own life away. So, yeah, I think that's the direction for not just our spiritual practice, but also for the globe, that more of that is in leadership and in political leadership and, you know, impacting the way our society is, because the suffering in our society is we've forgotten our belonging to each other. You know, we've forgotten. And it's so distinct right now that we're so polarized. There's very few people that don't have somebody on the other side, some figurehead or something that they don't feel a sense of real kind of a venom or bitterness or hatred towards. And it's being stoked by social media. So I feel like it's the feminine archetype is what is needed right now to rebalance and heal our planet.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I like the quote from the Dalai Lama. He said, "Kindness is my religion." I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's. I think that there are many people like him and others that realize that that's sort of the core of it. I think that, like you were saying about the ashram that you were at, where it was sort of like a striving kind of culture, and there's like it's a purifying and fix yourself and whatever, that there are many strains of spirituality and many even spiritual teachers that are more focused on sort of a kind of spiritual perfection rather than a kindness and compassion for yourself and others. And what I've found is that those, in my experience, those paths that are focused on that spiritual perfection tend to be like very hierarchical, very like I'm more spiritual than you, and like whatever things like that. And the kind that's focused on compassion and kindness do tend to have better effects on the people that are actually practicing them and people that are in those communities. And I saw that I was listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast, and you had this very difficult, I think, experience at the ashram that you were at, where you had been pregnant, and that you had been practicing and had a miscarriage, and that you had said something that maybe, hey, they should warn people that if in the very hot conditions, that maybe like it could be a problem if you're pregnant, and that the leader of the ashram had been, instead of compassionate toward you and realizing that you had just gone through a very difficult experience, that he basically called you out in front of hundreds of people, saying like, this lady is trying to blame me for a miscarriage and it's because of your ego and things like that. And that to me is like the epitome of of this sort of like spiritual perfectionism culture, and with the lacking compassion. And I was recently, we released this issue, here you can see, with Sadhguru and Deepak Chopra. We called it our Guru issue. And I don't know which way to turn this computer, but basically, one of the big themes of that issue is about the way that people see gurus, and the way that sort of gurus are perceived, and the way that that kind of can be hurtful in certain ways to the guru himself or herself, and the person that is sort of idolizing the guru. And I think that to a large extent, that the problem with gurus is, and the problem with the guru culture and the idea of gurus, is this idea that there is such a thing as perfection, and that certain people are better than other people, and more spiritually evolved. And I think a lot of that comes from the spiritual perfection culture that you're talking about, that striving culture. Whereas I think that certain people, as an example, Amma, don't come at it that way. They come at it more from a place of love and compassion, and they become gurus to people just by nature of their compassion, rather than their awesomeness, or perfection, or whatever. And do you have you noticed that difference in the types of gurus that there are, the type that are the perfect type, and the spiritually evolved type, versus the just loving and kind type? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, and I think even more important than the word guru is the nature of the hierarchy. That when there's a rigid hierarchy and it's a dominance hierarchy where you have somebody on top with control, it's a setup for corruption. It's a setup for violation. There's so much research now that shows that those who have that kind of power don't have empathy.
Hmm.
Others become an object to control, and if the object doesn't cooperate, then there's vengeance. If the object cooperates, then there's inappropriate relationships. That's what's
Hmm.
happened in those spiritual communities.
Hmm.
So I think the piece that's really important for us to pay attention to here is what is going to evolve us past dominance hierarchies. Because if you look at the real suffering that's going on, let's say I'll just focus on the West, but everywhere in the world, really, racism. Racism is a dominance hierarchy where whites are placed above Black and Indigenous and other people of color. Hierarchies are inherently a setup for violation.
Hmm.
And because we forget the preciousness of every being when some are superior and some are inferior. We forget that we all arise from the same awareness. We're the same basic essential sentience. And then we don't relate to each other with true respect. So it feels to me that, on the spiritual path, one of the most important things we can look out for is there truly respect? Is there a true honoring? Is there namaste? I see the divine in you that's truly there between all beings. Or is it being covered over by some idea that some are better than others?
Yeah. You had mentioned this idea that hierarchies tend to lead to corruption, and that the people that are in control tend not to have empathy. Do you think that the lack of empathy in these leaders comes from so there's sort of like this correlation that you're drawing, the lack of empathy and these like top of hierarchy position. So when I think about that correlation, I think about where's the causation, and where's the cause and where's the effect. Do you think that people who are lacking empathy tend to rise to leadership positions, or do you think that the when people get into leadership positions, even if they had been empathetic before, that they tend to lose their empathy because of the position that they're in?
I don't know.
Mm,
And that would take, I would go off into some kind of an intellectual theorizing on that one. But
mm,
what I do know is that um, there are people are naturally more alpha or less alpha, and that's not a problem necessarily. You can be a healthy alpha and still be respectful and not need to control others, just happen to be more skilled and so on in certain areas and take it on. But it's the insecurity, Kevin, that does it, and that most humans are very insecure. And so the more power, the more there's a grasping to hold the power at whatever cost. And
yeah.
that whatever cost, the whole life becomes organized around holding its position. Any threat to others are seen either as you're going to support my position or you're going to thwart my position.
Mm,
and and then those that are buying in the belief system that are less in the less superior role end up being losing their empowerment, losing their energy, losing their spontaneity, because they're always having to be scared about how they're going to be treated. So hierarchies are natural in most, species. And the more we wake up, the more we have the capacity to use them in skillful ways, but really disband them when it comes down to the being decent humans to each other and taking care of each other.
hmm. Yeah, wow, that's very well said. And yeah, I tend to agree about the when actually I wrote about it in the guru issue, about how it actually can be hard for the guru that's in that position. It can actually stop them from being able to enjoy their lives because they constantly have to feel like they have to be perfect and be able to project this image of perfection in a certain way because otherwise they could lose their power. And that I think it's kind of a funny thing that when people rise to these spiritual heights and become these great leaders, that they can often be in a very difficult place internally. You know what I
Well,
mean?
exactly. Well, it actually is exacerbated because the more you think you have to be perfect, the more you have to cover over being imperfect, and you have a split. Your shadow takes over. I mean, think of priests that are supposed to conduct themselves in certain ways and are getting it on with young boys. It's like it's again, this isn't limited to one tradition, one culture, one anything. It's there is a real sickness when we have to strive to be different than who we are and bury it. And sadly, what happens for most of us in entering this society is we're all given standards of how we should be. And it's delivered through our caregivers. You should be successful in this, you should look this way, you should have this kind of a body, you should have this kind of a personality. And our parents let us know. I mean, there's very few of us that got that unconditional love that said, you're absolutely fine just as you are. And so we're given the message that to be loved and to be accepted, you need to be different. And then we spend our energy trying to conform ourselves into the shape that will be acceptable. And it's so interesting to watch any interaction you have with somebody else and notice how much of it is being in a way that you want the other to then see and either respect or like or both. It's like we're rarely truly spontaneous because we've had to spend so long presenting a persona. And that's why I have such a love for a path of mindfulness and compassion, because if we can start seeing that, we can start freeing ourselves. We can start noticing, oh, I'm believing this idea about myself. And we get it that you don't have to believe your beliefs. That's the gift of meditation, that you realize you're not your thoughts. You don't have to believe your beliefs. And our beliefs keep us so small. I mean, they keep us from realizing the luminosity that's here, the awareness, the creativity. They keep us from inhabiting our wholeness. So it takes both seeing it and also deep self-compassion, because there's so much pain that holds those beliefs in place. It's not just I am going around feeling like I'm an unworthy person. There's a felt sense in the body that um, is hurting, when we're in that. So we need a lot of self-compassion to wake up out of those beliefs and really inhabit who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That's beautiful. I want to go to a couple of the questions that are in our chat right now. I saw an interesting one from Tamar. She said, "Hi Tara, thank you for your work. I'm curious about the conversation of hierarchy. How do you see the role of leadership and how to prevent the idealization and corruption of that leader?" Which I think that's a really interesting question. How do you prevent the idealization and corruption of a leader?
That's a fantastic question, Tamar. Thank you so much, because it's one of the areas I'm most interested in. And I think what's the most protective element in this is ongoing, real, transparent, grounded dialogue. I think the more we connect with each other, and that means leaders with other leaders, leaders with those who they're collaborating with or who are working with, the more there are forms for mindful dialogue where we can give feedback. And giving feedback's a really big deal. A mature leader can give and receive feedback. Feedback is what allows us to see past the biases and the blindnesses and become aware of what we're not aware of. It's the protection. And there are formats for it. When there's conflict, there are formats for conflict resolution, for mediating, for being able to be with each other in the midst of it. I feel like most leaders get into trouble if they're isolated. And if they're mature enough and they have true, honest feedback loops going with other people, they can keep waking up.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That I think it has a lot to do with the personality of the leader, his or herself. But yeah, what about I like to stop people from idealizing, or how do we as individuals stop like idealizing leaders? It seems like it's like almost like natural to do that. Maybe it's evolutionary in a certain way to think of leaders as like these people that are above us in a certain way. You know what I mean? And I can see I do it too sometimes with politicians that I like, or like industrialists that I like, or things like that. And but how do we stop doing that ourselves?
There's two interesting questions in there. How do we stop doing it ourselves? And if we're a leader, how do we not have our identity glom on to feeling like we're a special person and an important person?
Hmm.
And so on the first one, and this is if we're in the hierarchy and we're not this on the superior level, the supposed superior level, let's say, the way, again, is to keep coming back to being intimate with our inner life, because in the moments that we're mindful of what's going on inside us and we're compassionate, we enlarge. That's the blessing. Our sense of who we are enlarges. We instead of being, let's say, if I'm in a place of anxiety and I can notice the anxiety and be with it kindly and say, thank you for trying to protect me, but I'm okay right now, that kind of thing. Really be with it. What I discover is my consciousness is inhabiting the space of compassion. I'm no longer the anxious person. I've enlarged to be that awareness that's just kind towards that part of myself. That's the pivotal shift that in all the mystical traditions, practices pointed to, which is we wake up out of being the scared person or the angry person or the jealous person, and we become the awareness like an ocean that sees those waves and cradles those waves, but it's not limited to them. We become the ocean, not the waves. And if you trust you're the ocean, you're not afraid of the waves. So that's how we wake ourselves up from thinking somebody is so great and so much better than us. And it helps to have, again, others to talk to, because in the moment I can name, like, oh, that person's intimidating to me. I can't believe how da-da-da they are. I'm not so caught in the enthralled self. I'm more the mindful self.
Mm,
So it's both being with ourselves so we open up to who we really are and being with others. But I also want to name a bit about how does the leader not buy into the projections? Because gurus and leaders and, well-known people, they end up worshiping them, and then the person starts thinking, well, there must be something pretty special here that others are treating me this way. And I remember, for myself, I'm in a much smaller pond, but I started, I was teaching a lot and groups started getting larger. And I remember, I'd come back from a day long, and there would be where I'd been with a lot of people and people had been so happy to see me and so on. And I'd come home and I could feel a certain kind of distance, like I was up there
mm,
being appreciated, but I wasn't feeling connected. And when I looked more deeply, I could see that there was some belief that I was the helper, I was the teacher, and they were the students, and that us, them actually caused pain. And I started a practice with myself because I realized that was special person who was special, but actually felt separate.
mm,
And when I'd notice special person or self-importance come up, I'd pause. And there's nothing like pausing. If we want to interrupt a pattern, we have to pause and just get quiet and notice more deeply, okay, what's going on? And I would sense the belief that, in some way I had something important to share or whatever it was, and the swell of ego with it. And then feel underneath that a kind of agitation and insecurity that, I felt off, like something wasn't there. And I would just bring kindness to it. It was embarrassing. I'll say that, Kevin, to feel like I was identified with a special person felt embarrassing. But if I could name that, just
mm,
say, okay, this is embarrassing, this is painful, I feel separated from people, and bring self-compassion, that magic happened. And this is the magic of mindfulness, that presence allowed me to realize again who I am beyond a particular role that I might get caught in. That's freedom. So I did many, many rounds of bringing mindfulness and compassion to special person.
mm,
And now if it comes up, and it's just a habit that's very there but fleeting now, because if some adulation, I can see it flicker up, and then I can immediately feel the suffering of it,
mm,
immediately bring some presence to it, and realize that's not who I am.
mm.
It's just not. And so again, I think maybe not every teacher leader has to go through a special person practice, but certainly we have to pay attention to, it's sticky and subtle to feel above others.
Mm. Yeah, and it does definitely come with some suffering and feeling of separation. I like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
I like the way that you articulated that about the antidote to that is to connect with the oneness. Um, I, I guess I'm just rephrasing it, but to connect with sort of the realization that we are all this, cosmic ocean of consciousness, and we're all like connect with with the larger self, and you connect with um, the experience of this moment. That sense of separate self kind of dissolves.
That's
I
true.
think that,
And just to
yeah,
say, if I came back from that workshop and said, "Oh, we're all one," that wouldn't have done it. It would have been a platitude. It would have been
Mm,
conceptual. What I had to do is actually be with an investigate special person, because that role that I was in, and actually pay attention to the beliefs and the stickiness and the pain.
mm,
That was the pathway back to that larger presence that, of course, is not my presence, it's our shared presence. But it would have been a spiritual bypass
mm,
if I had noticed special person and said, "Wait a minute, we're all one. It's namaste, namaste, the divine light in everyone." That would have been just a bypass.
mm,
I think and I just want to, for those listening, it's so important to catch spiritual bypass, because we're just covered over in this world with all sorts of very lofty spiritual ideas about how it all is. And often when we're stuck, if we try to go to those, either we'll feel like we don't get it or we're just falling short, or we'll actually for a little bit feel like, okay, things are better, but we won't have really gone to the roots of where the identification is and where the suffering is that needs attention. So it's really good to have antennas up about spiritual bypass. A lot of people do it around forgiveness.
mm,
They'll be blaming somebody, have a grudge, as
oh,
well. To be spiritual, I need to forgive them. And they'll say, okay, I'm gonna forgive them. But inside their heart's still tight, and they have bypassed the very challenging but necessary process for us to forgive. And forgiveness can take, decades sometimes. It's completely organic. We can't will it. We can only be willing. But it's if we bypass, we won't actually heal the wounds that caused us to clutch down in blame. And to heal those wounds, you actually have to go inside and feel where the hurt is. So I like talking about spiritual bypass because it feels like it forces us to do the honest presencing with ourselves that actually frees us.
mm. Yeah, wow. What you're saying about forgiveness. It reminds me of, I don't remember, there was like a movie and there was sort of like this hippie in the movie. It wasn't like a spiritual movie, but um, I think it was played by Juliette Lewis, the hippie. I don't remember what movie it was, but there was some guy was being like kind of mean to her, and she was just like, "Only love," like that's it. And she was seemed like angry. She seemed like angry when she said it, but it's like only love, like that's it, like she was only coming from love, but you could see the anger in her face. I feel like I know what you mean about this sort of spiritual bypassing, thinking that by having these spiritual ideas that you're really healed and healing and whatever, but sometimes you still have that stuff that you
Yeah,
need to work on.
your example's a great one though. Only love,
Yeah.
because I see people using the metta meditation that way, the loving kindness practice, where somebody is difficult and you just say, okay, may you be happy, may you be happy. But you're not really saying, if somebody's difficult in your life, you might want to check in and sense, okay, what really is reacting in me and what's that about? And bring care and presence to that if you really want to unearth it, not just may you be happy, which may not be so sincere in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's a really important topic, and we can totally go deeper in that. I know that we had planned this until about 11, but do you have a few more minutes? Because there were a couple of other
I,
topics I wanted to.
I have 5 to 10 minutes at max. Yeah.
Okay, let's cap it off then with a nice thing to end on. Okay, so I have a question from Forrest. He wrote it in before. He was talking about the your book, the Radical Acceptance, and the book is in large part about accepting yourself and accepting the parts of yourself that you struggle against, and that you aren't accepting. And what Forrest's question was, how can we find the parts of ourselves that we are not accepting, the parts that are unconscious, that we're unconsciously pushing away?
Yeah, that's a good one, Forrest. I think what we can do is just track the suffering. You can't just say, okay, what am I not aware of and pushing away? But what you can do is notice when you're suffering, and then sense underneath the suffering, what is it right now I'm really unwilling to feel or touch into? So let suffering be a portal. I mean, we have such an interesting relationship when we feel emotional pain. Our nervous system's designed to want to push it away. So if we can, we try to get away. But after you practice for a while, you start getting the knack of turning towards it, because something in you knows that it's really by going through it that there's some freedom. It's like there's these beautiful tankas or Tibetan art where you see that at the center is of the image is the gold, the enlightenment, the beauty. But you have to, in order to get there, you have to go through these animal-headed goddesses that are passionate and angry and jealous and hateful and so on. You have to go through those elements of your psyche with presence and openness and clarity and acceptance and love in order to get really awake to who you are underneath. And that's the way it is. And so let the suffering be a portal. Like when you sense suffering, go in and sense, okay, so what is this? What is the pain here? What wants attention? And really, you're asking in a deep way, what does this part of me most need right now? How does it want me to be with it? How does it want me to be with it? And you really listen. And if you then respond from your highest self, from your awake heart, you're beginning to really do just what you asked. You're paying attention to the unseen parts of yourself that want attention.
Thank you, Tara. That was beautiful. And thank you for joining us today on the Meditation Magazine podcast. And Tara is going to be in the next issue of Meditation Magazine. It's called Powerful Women in Meditation. We've been interviewing some really amazing women who are from spiritual teachers like Tara Brach, all the way to celebrities and supermodels and things like that that are also into meditation, who are successful in their own fields. And I think it's going to be a really cool issue and really kind of bring in that divine feminine energy that we were talking about earlier, that compassion energy, the love that sometimes can be missing from the conversation in spirituality. So thank you so much for joining us, Tara. And I really am excited for how this article is going to come out. I think that the issue is going to be great. I think your article is going to be great. And I had a very nice time talking to you today. Thank you.
Oh, namaste, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be with you, to get to know
Yes.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, you as
Blessings.
well. Blessings. All right. Thank you for everyone for watching. Have a beautiful